All right. Hello again, everybody. So, I'm going to be talking about mainly the second solution to the Jewish problem during the Holocaust. But first, I'm going to review a little bit of what you've already should have learned this week. So, let's recap. On Monday, you all should have watched an introduction video to the Holocaust and a video on what the history of anti Semitism is in Europe. So, the first few slides will review the basic information on this. So if you're going to take notes on a sheet of paper, I recommend you get a sheet of paper. If you have a different way of taking it and you just want to listen or you just want to read the notes on your own and not listen to me, that's perfectly fine as well. So let's review. What was the Holocaust? So the Holocaust was the organized murder of at least 6 million European Jews by the Nazis, including another 5 million that amounts to 11 million. And unfortunately, the Holocaust is the largest genocide in history. And it's important to know what a genocide is, first of all. A genocide is the attempt to kill an entire ethnic or religious group of people. When we talk about decolonization of Africa, we'll eventually talk about the Rwandan genocide, um, which isn't as nearly bad as the Holocaust, but still a horrible, horrific tragedy. So the Holocaust began in 1933 when Hitler came into power and ended in 1945 when World War II ended and the camps were liberated by the Allies. So this history of hate, anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews in Europe, as you guys saw in the video, goes all the way back to the time of Jesus Christ. But it wasn't until 1879 when the term was coined. But for several centuries, European rulers, both Christian and non-Christian, so secular, had implemented discriminatory policies and incited violent attacks on the Jews. And as you see in this painting here, several, well, the whole Jewish population were portrayed as devil worshippers, animals, cruel things. But discriminatory policies included denial of civil rights, synagogue burnings, massacres, early ghettos, expulsions from cities, countries. And of course, they eventually gained a couple of rights in the 1800s. But at the same time, that century, this it's fake science now, of eugenics came to be. And eugenics is basically determining the satisfactory conditions of a certain race so that that race can live on. Survival of the fittest, I guess, if you want to call it. And the Nazis believed that, and that's how they came to define Jews as a race or Semites. And the idea formed in the 19th century, well, I already mentioned that. The Nazis developed this philosophy of racial hygiene, so protecting Aryan blood from the contamination of non-Aryan people by following eugenics. And apparently, science and research was used to back this, but as I've said, science has proven to be fake. So, quick overview. You should know this already, but covering the basics here. All right. So Tuesday and Wednesday, you should have completed an active classroom reading on the first solution to the Jewish question. The next two slides are going to talk about this. It's worth going over just to understand how Hitler wanted to solve the problem, his problem of Jews in Germany. So the first solution or the first phase of the Holocaust was to, quote, free Jews from German life by, number one, stripping them of the German citizenship. Two, using harsh discrimination laws to force Jews to leave the country. And three, expel Jews from Germany. This took place over the course of 6 years, 1933 to 1939. And here's just a little timeline. In 1933, the Nazis announced a boycott of all Jewish-run businesses. From 1933 to 35, many Jewish people left Germany and went to the United States, England, or Austria, even though they were eventually annexed by Germany. 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were passed, and that determined the citizenship of German Jewish people, which basically stripped them of citizenship. And then until 1939, Nazis issued several anti-Jew laws. Examples: the Jews were fired from civil service jobs. Jews were required to register their property. Jews were not permitted to visit certain places, such as parks, after certain hours or just completely. In 1938, Kristallnacht occurs, Night of Broken Glass, when Jewish businesses are destroyed and taken apart. 30,000 Jews are sent to concentration camps, and many Jews leave the country. I think it's during this time that Albert Einstein leaves. 1939, Jews are ordered by the Nazis to wear a yellow Star of David to be easily recognized and targeted. So daily life for Jews in Nazi Germany at this time was not the best. They were banned from public library reading rooms, public transportation, cinemas, theaters, parks, recreations, daily curfews. You're prohibited from owning their own cars, typewriters, from smoking, prohibited from buying flowers, purchasing eggs, vegetables, and meat and white bread. So they were basically, I guess you could say, below second-rate citizens. All right, so that's the first phase of the Holocaust, and I guess it was successful in some way, in that many Jews left. But of course, several stayed behind, hoping it would be a phase that would just pass by. But as Hitler gained more power and as he annexed other countries in Europe, that all took a turn for the worse. And that leads to the second solution of the Holocaust, or the second phase, which is about 3 years from the start of World War II to the time Hitler invades Russia. So, World War II begins, Hitler begins conquering Europe, and a question arises: how do we make the Nazi land, quote, Jew free? The solution that Hitler and his commanders came up with: order all Jews to live within certain very specific areas of big cities known as ghettos in Eastern Europe. So Poland, a little bit the eastern part of Austria. What this means uh, is that Jews were forced out of their homes, sometimes forcibly, and those who wouldn't cooperate would be shot, killed on the spot, and they were to move into smaller apartments with other families in ghettos. And ghettos were, they weren't small little towns, they were actually pretty big cities, but they were blocked off from the rest of society. So you'd have barbed wired fences and eventually walls that would reach 10 feet to force Jews to live in their own communities, and a horrible community at that. In the ghettos, Jews were forced to live within the confines, they weren't allowed to leave. And the whole idea here is that Hitler hoped that Jews would starve to death and die from uh, diseases. Um, so horrible conditions in the ghettos, which I'll get to in a second. But the second solution, if we were to put it in a sentence, in a nutshell, what is basically the imprisonment, slavery, and starvation of the Jews. So ghettos were all over Europe, Eastern Europe. Here are just some of the famous cities where some ghettos were located. And as you can see, the populations reached the thousands. The largest was in Warsaw, about 450,000. And within the ghettos, you would have a Jewish council or a council running the whole city. But these were kind of Jews, I guess you could say, sympathetic to the Nazis, not necessarily, but a lot of them were just forced, and they're what we call Judenrat. In the ghettos, the Nazis ordered Jews to establish Judenrat, a Jewish council to administer the ghettos. Now, they organized police forces, distributed food, provided healthcare services, and eventually they came to an almost unbelievable task and cruel task of deciding who would be sent to the concentration and to the death camps. And they would be deciding people like friends, family, and eventually, when these people were sent to the concentration camps, sometimes more than 1,000 would be loaded onto trains to their eventual death, which is what the concentration death camps were for. Life in the ghettos, as I mentioned, was horrible. Overcrowding in the apartments, in the streets. 6 to 7 people would have been crowded into a room. Food rations of about 200 calories a day uh, were for workers. For workers, a good breakfast might have been a slice of bread and a coffee, and then they would be sent to forced labor. Some of them would have to march up to 8 to 10 miles a day just to work and to come back. And once they started working, there would be no lunch break. 10 to 12 hours of continuous work. They get back home at midnight, wake up at 4, and that's what would happen. Um, some had jobs, others survived through smuggling and other illegal activities. Kids were actually good at smuggling in carrots and other vegetables. And thousands would die every month, every week. Um, but the Jews, nevertheless, the community in there would try their best to keep their traditions going. So illegal prayer services, private schooling would take place behind closed doors at night so that the Nazis wouldn't be able to see. And although fences were used, as you see here, eventually walls would separate the ghettos from the rest of Europe. So Jewish resistance, as I noted, there would be planted gardens, soup kitchens, schools conducted in secret, food smuggling in, and of course, really interesting stories about actors and musicians continuing to make plays and music. Um, Uprisings occurred as well. And this clip here, which I can't show you here, I'm going to make it available in Schoology. If you want to take a look at it, there is a famous story of a Warsaw ghetto where the Jews rose up and took action, violent action against the Nazis. So watch that in your own leisure. But I just want to point out that during the Holocaust, Jews were not the only groups targeted. There were several other groups: Romani people, Poles, Slavs, blacks, people with physical or mental disabilities, the elderly, homosexuals, so gays and lesbians. It all goes back to that belief of racial hygiene, making sure that the Aryans aren't, quote, contaminated with non non-pure, non-Aryan blood. So there is this famous saying, how does it go? I think it's all Holocaust victims were Jews, but not all Jews were Holocaust victims. So if I said that wrong, then oh well, but I'm remembering on the spot. Okay. And here's one more interesting thing. So Jews had to wear that yellow Star of David. Other targeted groups would wear similar, a Star of David, but with a different color. So Romani is brown, Jehovah's Witnesses violet, homosexuals pink, your common criminal green, your political prisoner red, immigrant blue. So this is how the Nazis would identify you as a as an enemy and somebody to be exterminated. So that's the second solution in a nutshell. Um, Life in the ghettos uh, did its job, what it was supposed to do. It killed several thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews. But the next phase is where the true atrocities of the Holocaust would be committed, and that would be Hitler's final solution, which is to send every single Jew to the concentration and to the death camps. And that's what we'll get to next week. Um, but for now, just understand the second solution, equate it with ghettos and slavery. All right. If you have any questions, please email me. Um, if you want to learn more about this, I've got a ton of stuff for you, but this is the essential information that you need to know.